Well, it's going to be a little bit boring, and I'll just have to describe what things look like. So you'll get to experience it and describe Drupal, which is definitely a thing. Oh, I know what this is. We'll work on accessibility, and I'll be like the screen reader, and so that's how it's gonna happen. All right, so I suppose without further delay, so. Je suis pour voir Drupal rota. So, multilingual Drupal, Drupal for warriors, multilingual Drupal, in the original Klingon. So, a little introduction about me. I'm David Pascoe-Deslauriers. I'm the CTO of Coldfront Labs. I am an expert in Drupal. I've been working with Drupal for over 16 years. It's about 17, almost 17, I think. I am not an expert in Klingon. I've been learning Klingon since about May, and it started when I got this book as a joke. It is Hamlet in Klingon. It's a side-by-side translation of Hamlet and then Hamlet written in Klingon. And I sort of was like, I'm going to learn this. And I reached sort of an impasse that I hadn't expected with this particular book, is that I started to understand Klingon, but the other half is Shakespeare, and I've got no chance there. So what are we talking about? We're talking about how language handling works in Drupal, what multilingual is in Drupal, what's required for Drupal to be in Klingon if we wanted to have a Drupal site in Klingon, and in case you're already familiar with language handling in Drupal, the Klingon language. So we'll learn a bit of Klingon. So why Klingon? Klingon is just a fun language to learn. Oddly enough, it is a language that, despite being a made-up language, everybody knows where it's from, and almost everybody knows one word in Klingon already. So you probably know kla. Oh, and it's also an excellent flimsy pretense to talk about how locales and languages are handled in Drupal. All right, so the question we need to ask is, why would Klingons even need Drupal? What are some of the use cases for having Drupal be in Klingon? The big one, of course, is that Klingons, like all of us, eventually need a content management system, and there aren't any content management systems natively in Klingon. So that's something Klingon speakers definitely need. You could have a content management system where you need to support teams with multiple languages on. That include Klingon speakers. You may also want to include information on your site that is accessible to your Klingon audience. You may also want to present users information in whatever language they prefer. And for Klingon speakers, that would be in Klingon. And you may have a legal requirement to present information in multiple specified languages, and one of them could be Klingon. All right, so we'll just get started, and we'll speak some Klingon. So I'll say shuaj-a, and then you can say shuaj-a. That is, do you understand, with the plural you. And you could answer chija, which is answering the affirmative to a yes or no question for yes. You could answer jiaj for I understand, or mayaj for we understand. All right, so what are languages to Drupal? So Drupal's default language, when it doesn't have a language, is English. The code is all in English. The strings in the code are all in English. Everything needs to be in English. It's one of the rules of contributing to Drupal. It's in English. So when you have Drupal by itself, it's English. However, Drupal's full of systems that let you manage this so that it doesn't have to be displayed in English. And I'd love to show you them. So, getting into this, what is multilingual? And it's the locale system gives you multilingual, and it gives Drupal the ability to detect the appropriate language for the user that's asking for a page, displays text and strings in that language. It gives you the ability to manage content in multiple languages, or just content in one language, but have the different pieces of content be in different languages. And then finally manage content that has translations of each bit of content. All right, so we're all going to put on our mind's eye into Drupal. And we'll do some describe Drupal. So there are 4 core modules that control multilingual, or that give you the multilingual features. And they're all in the multilingual section if you go to extend. So if you go to extend down to multilingual, these are what you see. The first one that we're going to talk about is just the language module. So we'll turn that on. Everyone is imagining it installing right over here. So what that gives you is it adds a section on the configuration page inside of region and language called languages. And from there you can manage all the languages that are enabled on your site. When you just have the language module installed, you don't get translation for anything yet. You just get to control languages and support multiple languages. So here you can add languages. Drupal has an entire database of languages, official translation languages that you can choose from, but you can also set a custom language. All a custom language needs to have is you need to give it a language code, which you can make up. It doesn't have to be real. And then a name for the language. And that's what Drupal's just going to use internally to track things that are in that custom language. So even if you have a specific dialect of English that you want your site to be in, and just override things for that dialect, you can make a custom language for it. When you add languages, you might notice that you got 2 bonus languages. There's un and zzz. Their default language. Und is for things where the language is not specified. So there's going to be cases where Drupal doesn't actually know what language this is in. And then there's the language ZXX, which is language not applicable. And there's tons of content that you'll have where language doesn't matter. Numbers, Booleans, geolocated points. They don't really have a language. They are just data. All right, so we'll take a little break from Drupal and learn about some Klingon. So Klingon does have its own typeface for it, but nobody uses that because it is impenetrable to most humans. So Drupal is usually written in something called Latinized Klingon. Latinized Klingon is entirely phonetic. Klingon is a phonetic language, so after this, you will all be able to read Klingon aloud. The Latinized Klingon looks a bit weird, and it's because it is a mix of upper and lowercase letters, and they don't have the meaning of uppercase and lowercase letters. What they are, in fact, is their own letter, just using the uppercase symbol as a hint that the phonetics of that letter are not what the phonetics in English are. So here's all the letters. You'll notice that some of them are digraphs, and there's one trigraph in there. So even though there's 2 letters, that's one Klingon letter. And then there's the one over there that's 3 letters, but that's one letter. So here are the Klingon vowel sounds. We have A, so it's a, or at, et, eat, ot, and oot. And then there's digraphs, so 2 letters. So you have out, eat, at, or it, ate, you, oi, oit, and uit. The next are the Klingon consonants. And I break the Klingon consonants up into 3 groups. Ones that are like the English, ones that are like English, ones that are mostly like English, and ones that English doesn't have at all. So the consonants that are similar to English, it's going to be B, so bi, chai, jai, lai, mai, nai, pi, and the P, it has an asterisk there because you have to really, so pi, rai, apparently that one's supposed to be lightly trilled, so sort of like French, but it's not really defined. Pi, which is another one where you got a real sound. Vi, Y, and Yai. So pretty simple. You can almost all read the entire alphabet already. And then the ones that are sort of in English are these 4 right here. So the D, you pronounce it like a D, and hopefully you get a lot of participation in this because we'll practice, because it's not like English. So you'll make a D sound, a D, but take your tongue, and instead of doing D at the front, slide it all the way back where you get to the end of your hard palate, like this, and then say your D sound. So D, D, Die. That's the Klingon D. Then we have a Ny, so Nyai. So this is like the N with a little squiggle on it in Spanish, the Ny. So like, dang it. So it does appear in English, but in Klingon it can be at the beginning of different words. So your Ny sound. The Klingon Q, which is different. So it's another one. You want to take your tongue sort of all the way back, and then do sort of a Q sound. So k, k. And then the uppercase S is the Klingon sh. So it's another one where your tongue is back for the shy. All right. All good? Everyone said it? All right. And so these are the Klingon consonants that are definitely not in English. So when you're saying these, you may spit on the person in front of you. If you were spit on, it's important to remember that Klingons do not find this offensive. So you will not be offended if like spit comes out of somebody else's mouth while they're talking. That's perfectly normal. All right, so these ones are the fun ones to say. So the first one, the uppercase H, is a ch, like l'chaim, or lach, or bach. So chai. Yeah, there you go. Come on, ch. Give it a real ch. The next one, the uppercase Q, it's similar. So if you can't do your ch, you might want to practice it, because we're going to put our tongue all the way back to do a ch, and we're going to blow air across our tongue and give a so kai. Excellent. All right. Then we have the GH, which is the same kind of position for the ch. So it's the ch, except for we're going to use our vocal cords to articulate it and make a sound. And it's going to make sort of like an R sound, but I like to think of it as a growl. So, rai. There you go. I heard a good one right there. All right, so those are the good, nice throaty ones. So the next one is a real spitter. It's another sound we don't have in English. We're going to have our tongue more in the center of our mouth, and we're going to blow on both sides of the tongue, and it's going to be a cly. And this is actually how you say Klingon in Klingon. It's Klingon. All right. The last one, this is a consonant. It's easy to pronounce because it doesn't make a sound, but it is a stop. So when you see it in a word, it means that there's a pause there, but not just a pause, a shortening of the word. So there's a word in Klingon that's T-I. So te means vegetation. T-I apostrophe is te, which is the verb to repair something. So te, 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 te. All right. So now everyone can read the Klingon as they'll be on the coming slides. All right. So once we have our languages on, the next step is, did I skip one? Well, we'll just talk about this. The next step to talk about is how Drupal detects what languages there are. Or what languages are currently the active language. Drupal actually has two different kinds of languages that it uses that can be enabled. There's the interface language and the content language. Generally, you'd want these to be the same. But the interface language is going to be all the parts that are generated by code will be in that. And then the content language is the language of the rendered content. So all of your nodes and node types, your blocks, your menu items, all of the text that's entered in those, it'll be displayed in whatever the content language is. Everything else is going to be displayed in whatever the interface language is. Not all modules will support, and API calls support that Drupal can have two different values here. So it can get a little bit interesting. So when you have the languages modules installed, this would be a demo to show how you go and change what the default language is. But you can change what the default language is, and you can change how those are handled. If you go into your content language tab on configuration, you can choose how you want to expose languages when somebody's editing content. So you can let it be selectable, so they can pick what language that they're authoring content in, or you can force it to say it's going to be in whatever language that the site is in, or you could say this user always writes content by default in their preferred language, because users can have a preferred language if you have multiple of them. And how this works can be set up differently on the different kinds of entity and content types and their bundles. So you have two different kinds of nodes that handle language differently, or not at all. So this one is definitely one that would be too bad you can't see, so we'll describe it. How does Drupal pick what language you're actually accessing Drupal in? On your languages page, there's a second tab called Detection and Selection. On it are a list of plugins that control how Drupal picks what the language is. The default is by URL. And what it'll do is it'll create a prefix in front of all your URLs that is the language code. And you can go and edit the configuration and make those codes be whatever you want. However, you can have multiple ways that languages are detected. And you can choose the precedence order that you'd like them to be detected in. So you can have the language be whatever that user's default language or preferred language is. So if somebody logs in, the site is just in their language. They don't have a language switcher. There's no thing in the URL. They just get it in their language. You could also display it based on what the browser declares their language to be. So when browsers make requests, they actually specify what language they're in. And you can have Drupal just transparently read that and then present content in that language back to them. Or you can make them select what language it's in. And this detection plugin system also supports multiple of these options being selected at the same time, and they'll sort of fall through depending on if they can't detect what language it could be. Another example of language detection too is you can set different domains to be different languages. Okay, so once you have multiple languages on, how is language switching handled? And this depends, of course, a lot on how you were managing your language detection. But for the most part, there are blocks that offer different language switchers that one comes with a language module in core that gives you a list of all the languages. There are several contributed modules that offer language switchers that you can set up. Or you can actually just write your own, which is surprisingly easy. So the example code we have at the bottom shows how you can do that. In Drupal's URL API, takes an option for language. So we can actually just generate a URL in any language at any time. So if we get the current route, pop it into this and ask for the URL in that language, Drupal will already know how to do that. So we don't actually have to figure anything out to make a language switcher other than, the boilerplate around this. All right, so enough of that first languages module. Let's talk about interface translation. So that was the second module on the list. So interface translation gives us an interface to translate all of the built-in strings in Drupal. And it also lets you set up what the translations are for all of those. Where do we have this? So what are interface strings? Interface strings are just all the text that's translatable that is in Drupal that's written by code or anything. So the way Drupal handles these is whenever it's asked to render a string, it collects it. And when it is asked to render a string in a language that it doesn't have. Because the way strings are fed into the translation system, or the interface translation system, and then Drupal will go, and if it doesn't have it in its database, we'll write it in the database, and if it is in the database, it will look for a translation, and we'll try and return the translation in the language that you asked for. Isn't that nice of it? So once you have multiple languages enabled, and this would have been a neat part of the demo, every time you enable modules, you then get a batch job that runs. And it says downloading translations and moves along and downloads all kinds of stuff. So this also happens if you enable a supported language. So what is going on here? Well, on localized.drupal.org, this is the central site where all the translations are managed. You can actually go and make an issue in Drupal core to get your own languages added. If I wanted to get Klingon officially added to Drupal so that we could have an official Drupal translation in the list, we can make an issue there, and then Klingon will get added into the language list, and then all the translations for it will be stored on localized.drupal.org. And whenever you download things, whenever you enable new modules, Drupal will go and check on localized.drupal.org to see if there's translations for that language of all the modules, and we'll download them and import them. So what it's actually doing in the background is downloading what are called PO files. So PO files and POT files. So they're portable object and portable object template files. They're just text files that have lists of strings in them. So they look a bit like this. So you have what the string is in English, because the default language of Drupal is in English. So your mother has a smooth forehead, and then you would have the translation of, and is anyone brave enough to read it? You gotta
learn the cuss words early on in your language.
Oh, okay. We can do some Klingon cuss words.
Wasn't that what that was?
Well, that one's an insult, but that's not a cuss word.
Oh, okay.
Oh, and that's perfect. There's a Klingon sentences. All right, so Klingon words and syllables generally have, if you haven't noticed, the following structure. Consonant, vowel, consonant, which is a bit awkward coming from English, because we generally don't do syllables that end in consonant sounds. It's generally consonant vowel or consonant vowel. But we do consonants at the end for a few of them. But almost all Klingon syllables are like this. Generally, Klingon words are one syllable. There are longer words that are multiple syllables. However, Klingon uses a lot of suffixes to change the meaning of the words. So, yaj is the verb to understand. And when you say it without anything else, there's an implied sort of who understands what. So just yaj would be they understand it. Yaj lach would be they can understand it, because lach is can do the verb. Yaj lach be, that is, they cannot understand it, because be is the negation. So bet can go anywhere as a suffix, and it negates the word. Or you can get some more complex, you can get a long list of suffixes. There are 5 different categories of noun suffix and 9 categories of verb suffix. So there can be a lot of different ways to sort of create words to explain what you're talking about. So you can have things like which is when they can understand each other. All right, so we were talking about PO files. So PO files are these long lists of translations in a specific language. So base in English, and then the translation of all these strings. They can be imported and exported. And they can actually be included along with your modules. So if you are writing custom modules for a custom project and it has translation strings, you can actually reference them in your info.yaml file and say, hey, the translations for this project are actually in this file right here. And you give it a pattern for like what the project name is and where the language name is and where it is. And then Drupal will be able to automatically import that PO file when somebody enables your module. And then PO files are actually a standardized thing, so you can actually export them for strings that you're missing, and then give it to a translation service, and then re-import it when it has the translations. So, interface translation string use. How do you make use of this if you're developing in Drupal? And if you are writing any kind of code in Drupal, and you are putting strings in any of your code, you should be running them through the translation system, or else people who have to deal with multiple languages will be mad at you. So how is this handled in the different parts of Drupal? Because these strings, Drupal's got a lot of different kind of code. How is it managed? All right, so the first one is the T function. So you should only be using the T function in your .module file, if you have one, or .theme. And the way that it works there is you can just call it on a string, and then Drupal, when it renders that out and executes that, it will find the translation of it. So if you say T, my targ is very pretty, you will get ich hu tachwit. And then you can even do, if you are running, this is only if you're like in a module file or PHP file. If you're running in any kind of object or class, you should be using the this.t version of it. Do we talk about it there? Yes. Well, we'll skip ahead and then go back. So the way that you do that is Drupal comes with this handy string translation trait. Traits are a neat PHP thing. All it is a bundle of functions that you can imbue on any class. So you have to use it to bring in the namespace, and then because PHP is great, it hates to reuse a symbol, but it loves to reuse a word, you use it again inside the class. And so this use is different than that use. They mean different things. This imbues the class with the trait, and then this use imports the namespace. Thanks, PHP. But once you have that, your class now has the methods from the string translation trait, which includes the T function. The T function also has a way of handling variables, and this is very important because if you have a string that says so many results found, you don't want to generate infinite strings. you just want to tell Drupal the string is X results found. So you need to support replacements. So the way that you do that is with the replacement system. So, oh, that's going to be a problem. This code won't actually work. But you can use these replacements here. And so the translatable string is going to be my target's name is @name. And you'll translate that to the Klingon version. And then as arguments, you give it an associative array that is the symbol to what you're actually going to be replacing it with. And usually it's going to be a variable because you're writing code. All of your replacements need to have a specific prefix, or Drupal will say, absolutely no, you're not doing this right at all, and I refuse. The 3 prefixes that Drupal support are the @ which will sanitize the string. It does not sanitize it enough for you to put it inside of less than, greater than symbols, because then you're giving people access to write markup. It needs to be in the text area of your markup, if it's going to be anywhere. The $sign sanitizes it in the same way and then wraps it in M tags. So automatic emphasis on things. It's a great one for like 50 results. And then the last one is if you prefix it with a colon, it will sanitize it as a URL. And so you can write, like Anchor href equals, and then dot my URL, and then this. Okay, but what if you're writing JavaScript? How do you translate JavaScript? That gets a little bit weirder, but mostly works from a Drupal developer's point of view exactly the same. There is a Drupal object that's running inside the DOM, that's set up when you're running any JavaScript in Drupal, and it has a T function. So you just call Drupal T, and it will work, and it will return you the translated version of that string inside of JavaScript. The way this works is where it gets a little weird. So what Drupal actually does is this is aggregating the JavaScript together. It actually scans all the JavaScript for instances of Drupal T being called. And then it extracts the string that's passed to it, and it feeds that into the interface translation system. Then, when you go to a site in not the default language, Drupal populates an object called Drupal translations. And in it, all the strings, it's a giant object of all the strings with all their translations in that language will appear inside the JavaScript. So I would go and demo it, but it's not working. But so next time you're on a page that's Drupal and is multilingual, go into go into not English, open up your inspector, and then go take a look at the Drupal translations object, and you'll see all your JavaScript strings are already there. And this way, the strings that you have in JavaScript can be translated by Drupal as just standard interface strings. All right, and one of the last places you're going to see interface strings are in Twig. So what's that? 5-minute warning. Oh, we're nowhere near it. The next one's canceled, so I'm just going to keep going. Someone said I could. If you need to leave, that's fine. So the way that that's handled in this, there is a T filter that just runs it through the translation system, or there's a longer one which is trans. There's also a tag for trans that runs the entire string through it, and that's how you do replacements inside of Twig. And you should never do this directly, because it can do some unsafe stuff, because you're just piping directly with variables into the translation system. All right, Klingon mulech. So most Klingon words are either verbs or nouns. Klingon does not actually have any adjectives. All adjectives are verbs. So things aren't big, there's a verb to be big. And so you treat them like verbs. The other strange thing about Klingon is that Klingon sentences are structured with object, verb, subject, instead of subject, verb, object, like English. So in Klingon, if you say, the cat bit the dog, then that means that the dog bit the cat. Yes, because it's the opposite. The thing doing the verb, or the thing verbing, happens at the end, and the thing that is being verbed happens at the beginning. So, kar vishop jich is I, and kar is gak. So, kar vishop jich is I gak. But if you say it like we would say in English, jich mushop gach, that would be the gach eats me. Not as good. All right, we got lots of translation to talk about, but if you have to leave, just leave. All right, so the next kind of thing is configuration translation. So this is a separate module that gets enabled, and it's one of the other ways to translate things. So in Drupal, we don't just have code that's running, we also have code that's configured by users. So when you create new content types, when you create new vocabularies, when you create new web forms, when you create new views, those things are all lousy with strings that need to be translated that show to the user. When you have create new node type, how do you make that node type in different languages? That is handled by the configuration translation system. Once you have that module on, whenever you can configure something, you'll usually get a translate tab, and it will give you an interface that lets you translate that particular piece of configuration. There are also some things in Drupal that are configuration translation that's not really interface strings. The biggest one is date times. So there's datetime formats in Drupal. Their configuration, generally the datetime format in different languages is different. So you can translate how that format works using the configuration translation system.
We actually moved another session in here at 3:30.
Oh, at 3:30. All right, so I'm going to have to wrap it up.
Yeah.
All right, well then I'll just have to end things sooner. I started late.
Take people to another room.
Oh, I don't know how that excited they are.
We do have an empty room at 3:30.
Oh, okay. And all the configuration translation changes that you made, actually import and export and import with the configuration. So wherever your configuration synchronization directory is, it creates a languages and then the lang code directory, and then all of your language specific overrides for the config end up there. Finally, we have content configuration. Which gives you a configuration tab. We'll just blaze through it. We can do it in 2 minutes. Something important to know about content, translated content, is the source language, the first one you make, is different than any of the translations. It's treated differently. So the translations are always translations of the original. You can't switch which one is the original. Non-translatable fields can't generally be changed in any of the translations either. Fields can be translated or not. We can skip that. So paragraph translations. Paragraph fields, the entity revision fields, generally should not be translated. What you want to do instead is translate the fields that are actually on the paragraphs. Translations and views. Oh yes. When you create translations, what actually happens in the database is you get multiple entries for whatever that entity is. So if you have a node with the original language and 2 translations, you have 3 nodes with the same node ID but different languages. Normally, that's fine. In views, that gets weird because you can make a view on things and then all of a sudden you see duplicates. But you're not seeing duplicates, you're seeing the different node in the different languages. But then views happily translates them into whatever the current language is. So you see it 3 times in English if you're looking at it in English. But you're not actually seeing the English versions for the 2 others. You're not getting duplicates. This can get especially weird if you have relationships to translated entities, because the relationships in the database will then multiply how many different versions you have. So if you have a translated node to a translated taxonomy term, then all of a sudden you have 6 duplicates. So it's really important in views to filter out by language on all the items that support multiple languages. All right, more Klingon. So Klingon verbs have prefixes that explains what's happening to that particular verb. So you sort of saw them before. Giaj, so G is I understand. Kayaj, or Kayaj, is I understand you. So Biaj is you understand. And Kroyaj is you understand me. So there's a big table to memorize. All the fun of Klingon. Okay. How much time do we actually have time to talk about this? Sure, why not? An important tool for using if you're going to manage translations is a TMGMT, which is the translation management tool. If you were here for Perry's presentation, you would have got to see it in action. So he had a slide where it showed different translations waiting for translation and a way to manage them. That is this tool set. If you enable it, it gives you so 3 things: sources, jobs, and providers. Sources are the things on your site that can be translated. Jobs are different things that you would like to be translated. So you can group them together as a job and say, like, I want a translation of these nodes and these taxonomy terms, group them together into a job, and then you can send that job to providers. Provider can be a Drupal user that does translation. It could be an export to a file that you can give to a translation service, and it can be an AI that you feed it to, and then it comes back with the translations, and as a system to review those translations and then apply them in. Drupal AI also has a different translation module that uses, or a different translation module that is different than the one in Translation Management Tool. So in Translation Management Tool, you can have a provider that is AI. In Drupal AI, you have an AI translation submodule that lets you just on the translation page, it'll see where you're missing translations and give you a button to say, translate this with AI. And it will create a translation from the AI. So different language caveats. You probably don't want your interface language and your content languages to be different languages. You can 100% do this and it works fine. There's not a technical issue from doing this. So the reason why you might be tempted to do this is if they're saying, if you have if someone doing content updates in French, but they don't understand French, so they want the interface to be in English, but they need to be able to edit the French interface. Or they need to be able to edit the French content while being in the English interface. It sounds good in principle, and it can work if the person doing the content editing really understands Drupal, but in practice, this makes the most confusing website you've ever seen because it is displaying things in multiple languages at the same time, and it's not clear to most users what the difference between the configuration translation, interface translation, and content translation is, especially because blocks are content, but maybe the titles of the blocks are not content, that's configuration, and then everything else around that, like the button that says edit and things like that, that is also in the content, is an interface string, and then having that all mixed together with different languages is very confusing, so I advise against doing that. On the content translation page, you can choose what fields or content are translated, and frequently you have to use this to enable content translation on fields for certain kinds of entity types. If you've seen it, you know this page is a monster, like the permissions page. Just all of these collapsible sections with a million checkboxes. Don't save this in production, this page. When you save it, it makes tons of configuration changes and field overrides and all kinds of stuff. And usually it's done everything that you wanted it to do. It's not that it doesn't work, but it generates a ton of config. You're better off doing this in a dev environment, exporting the config, picking out the changes you actually want, undoing the rest, and then just pushing that along. And then, is this my last one? Yes, it is. All right, this will be my last slide, and then we'll turn it off. The last caveat I'd like to warn everyone about is workflows and translations. there is an ambiguous action that occurs when you're in this situation. Workflows allow you to have two different versions of a particular piece of content. So you can have the latest draft and you have the published version. When you're in this setup and you click translate, what are you translating? There is an ambiguous question that happens in Drupal. Are you translating the published version, which is the default revision, or are you translating the latest revision, which is the draft? Because if you translate the draft, if you translate the published version and then publish your draft, your translation disappears because that translation is no longer valid. It's the translation of the draft that's the valid one, and the translation of the draft is not the translation you just made. There are modules and patches to try and resolve this problem. However, they resolve it by changing what the default behavior is. Because the default behavior is when you click translate, you translate the default revision, which is the published one. So this situation can occur, and then people are very confused about why changes they made to translations have disappeared. They haven't disappeared. They were just made invalid, so Drupal's never going to show them to you. But they're still in the revision system, so you can go look at them. You can't get them back, because they're translating something that isn't a thing anymore, but they're still in there. So it's something to look out for, and just to understand that you could see this situation when you're using translations and workflows at the same time. All right, and now, in 2 minutes, I think I can give this to the next presentation. But thanks. If anyone has any questions, you can come ask me. If you have questions about Klingon, you can come ask me too.